חידה באמצע הדרך, מאת דוקטור אלון גלעדי. על המורה. בדרך אמונית-לוגית חדשה-ישנה, מתלמוד תורה ללימוד תורה.
The concluding chapter to this composition summarizes by the nature of things that which I saw to show in a general and primary manner so far. This chapter places before the readers the conclusions of this faithful, logical research. But the conclusions of this research, like every human determination, are but an opening and a prelude to their refutation, and, at the same time, to their conceptual and practical realization, and, in the matter of this composition, to a new old, faithful logical walking in their path. In this composition, I showed that there exists a fundamental difference between the formal Leibowitz to the esoteric, essential Leibowitz, just as there exists a fundamental difference between the reality perceived by our senses in a subjective manner to the reality understood by our intellect in an objective manner. By means of the refutation of the claims of the formal Leibowitz, I sought to reach systematic, essential, primary conclusions regarding what I termed the essential, esoteric Leibowitz, and this also in a complementary and advanced relation to the way of action of his great teacher and rabbi, and apparently declared, Maimonides, who at the opening of the guide commanded secrecy upon his students, in a worthy contradiction, of course, to the very writing of the guide and its publication, whose explanation is situated in its essence and in its content of the guide for the perplexed. First and foremost, I showed that the view of the formal Leibowitz regarding the distinction between the world of faith to the world of morality, and between both of them to the world of science, is refuted and erroneous from its foundation. As a conclusion to this refutation, I outlined a way for the discovery of the existence of a scientific fact, alongside a moral, philosophical, logical fact, alongside a faithful logical fact, and more so. After the refutation of the psychophysical problem regarding the separation between body and soul, I showed that the free will exists from a logical perspective, in a relative manner only, and from a faithful logical perspective only, it exists in an absolute, undefined, and divine manner in terms of its freedom. In practice, these conclusions revealed from the refutation of the formal Leibowitz, especially concerning the connection between the science, the wisdom, and the faith, lead us to that same point where Maimonides signed his faithful logical creation, and on the other hand, to the point of fracture between the faith and the science in the creation of Spinoza. From the perspective of Maimonides, it can be claimed that we stand now at a point closer than its predecessor to the palace, an additional step after the guidance of the Guide for the Perplexed, regarding the way in which one must walk toward the ultimate purpose of the faithful logical man, which is, according to the formal and essential Leibowitz, as one, the ultimate purpose of man in general, the worship of the undefined God, or more precisely, the effort unachievable by definition for the worship of God in the paths of the truth. The point of the erroneous conceptual separation from Maimonides, as well as from the connection required by him between the faith to the theory of wisdom, and between both of them to the science, I identified as said in a conceptual manner, with the apparently negative student of Maimonides, Spinoza. Here I showed that the determinations of Spinoza, in this context of the separation of the faith from the theory of wisdom on its derivatives, lean upon an erroneous research, goal-dependent, of his will in the separation of the religion from the state for the sake of optimal existence of the freedom according to his method, and mainly of the free thought of man. The refutation of Spinoza in this matter leaned upon his own method itself, according to which one must analyze a text wherever it is, and including a biblical text similar to the analysis of the nature. From this it arises that the analysis of the faithful text must be according to an exemplary understanding of the homiletic sense, darash, of the things, and not according to the literal sense, peshat, as itself, just as we analyze the nature, not according to the appearance of our eyes as itself, but according to laws that we discover in our thought by means of empirical refutations of our understanding of the existing reality, upon the rational, a priori substrate of each and every one of us. By the way, it will be said that a direct result to the correction of Spinoza is that the aspiration for the separation of the coercive religion from the state from here, and at the same time, the existence of the supreme possibility for the existence and advancement of the free logical faith from here, are necessary derivatives of the essence of the faithful logic as itself, and not of the artificial separation of the faith from the morality and from the science. The existence of the absolute free will in the faithful logic teaches us that in order to reach the peaks of the ultimate purpose of man according to the faithful logic, man must act in a thought-free manner, against his material nature pulling him to the bottom of the ladder, due to his basic material essence from dust to dust. This ultimate purpose of faithful logical peaks does not exist and cannot exist from a forceful overlap between the religion and the state, nor from the neglect of the faith and the morality by the public means, the state. The freedom of religion and conscience is not only the absence of coercion, but also the granting of possibility and conditions for the faithful logical development of the discovery of the universal faithful and moral laws, which in their faithful logical essence are the supreme rational free meditation of man. The worthy conditions for the faithful logical meditation as the ultimate purpose of man are situated specifically from a point of balance between the absence of coercion toward the individual and between the granting of the autonomous possibility, including material, for the faithful logical research. This matter is learned faithful logically also from the Torah. The true study at its supreme level is solely from within free thought. Required basic conditions for that purpose, including science, morality, and faith from within creation, and not from within miracles or coercion. From here that from within the ultimate purpose of the faithful logic for its own sake, lishma, is necessarily derived the faithful logical need in the separation of the religion from the state in its coercive essence, as distinguished from its free essence, and in the creation of balanced conditions of a possibility for material welfare, as well as for a scientific, moral, faithful meditation, required for a supreme free occupation in the faithful logic. We loathe the superiority and the coercion of the material, human, pharaonic rule, both in the faithful aspect and both in the moral aspect, and at the same time aspire to the worship of the undefined God in the thought desert, refining and free, lonely, personal, in which also there is a need for basic living conditions from the field of the matter and the morality, the individual and the collective together, and from it is necessarily derived the aspiration for a public mission, moral and faithful as one. This is the faithful logical worship of God, including a constant faithful logical progress from a relative free will toward an absolute free will, which forever will not be achieved. This is the eternal aspiration toward the supreme integration between the logical thought to the faith of the unity, monotheism, which is in practice the aspiration for the new-old prophecy and at the same time for the new-old halakha in their faithful logical meaning. After I showed that the approach of the formal Leibowitz regarding the connection between the science to the values and to the faith is refuted, and likewise that also the fundamental approach in the subject of Spinoza also it is refuted, I approached the checking of the correct rational basis for the faithful logical research. This checking was done by means of observation on the thought of the Enlightenment successor of Maimonides, who is none other than Kant. By means of the refutation of the categorical imperative of Kant, and the dealing with his erroneous rationalist observation regarding the religion within the boundaries of the reason, I reached a proposal for a synthesis between the thought of Aristotle as a conceptual logical basis prior to Maimonides, to the thought of Aristotle, Kant, and Maimonides, with required changes, as a conceptual basis prior to the modern, faithful, logical religion. Here I explained that the faith, like the morality and like the science, are a product of an empirical, rational process upon an a priori substrate, and not a product of an a priori process alone. Due to their complexity, the morality and the faith are appearing as products, relative at times, of a moral intuition and a divine revelation, but in practice, in their true essence, they are exemplary human, supreme interpretations of the essence, havaya, in its aspects of the is, yesh, including the status of man facing the essence of the is, and his status facing the inclusive essence meaning, in relation to the trail, shovalo, of the undefined God. The conclusions reflected from this faithful logical synthesis regarding the central idea of the formal Leibowitz are required to the subject of the ultimate purpose of the faithful man, meaning to the universal essence of the worship of the undefined God. Here I showed that the claim of Leibowitz, according to which the true, complete worship of God is the fulfillment of the halakha according to the 613 commandments as its existing halakhic interpretation, is erroneous as far as it is not a faithful logical interpretation of the homiletic sense, darash, of the written Torah. This conclusion passes us necessarily again to the starting point, and it is the separation from Maimonides, who outlined in his monumental project and at its peak in the Guide for the Perplexed, the beginning of the way in which one must walk for the sake of the sustaining of a faithful logical halakha, leaning upon an exemplary proof of what is stated in the Torah, in a way from rote study, Talmud Torah, to a modern, faithful logical study of Torah. Here the preliminary faithful logical question is asked: why a logical faith mainly according to the interpretation of the book of the Torah, and not in a parallel manner in the New Testament or the Quran, or any other theory of unity, monotheism? I did not require in this book to a detailed, faithful logical answer to this question, but I also did not hide behind the insufficient answer according to which this book discusses Leibowitz and not others, or that we deal with historical objects existing as a fact as the position of Kant, and therefore one must or must not relate to them, and I only noted and will return and note several comments. First, from a faithful logical perspective, every claim and every creation, and especially every religious foundation book discussing the faith in the one undefined God, and how much more so in a divine revelation of the one God, must be examined in a faithful logical manner. What is stated in this composition is correct for the halakha concerning the entirety of the monotheistic religions, according to their foundation books. For all the monotheistic faiths, there exists a point to which it is possible to return for the sake of correction and faithful logical progress from their individual perspective, and also from a general perspective, and it is sufficient for me at this stage regarding this matter. Without prejudice to what is stated above, I noted that the book of the Torah is accepted in such or another way as a base book for the entirety of the monotheistic faiths. This matter is noted explicitly by the founders of the Christianity and the Islam as stated in their foundation books, the New Testament and the Quran, which recognize the status of the book of the Torah, and in the prohibition to detract from it even a letter, even a tip of a jot, as distinguished from the subject of its interpretation. In practice, it can be therefore claimed that the entirety of the existing monotheistic religions constitute in their foundation such or another halakha of the book of the Torah, and an interpretation of the connection with the inclusive essence meaning, the status of man before the one God. Every religion from the entirety of the monotheistic religions claims that it is the binding and true halakha, but no religion has developed so far the claimed divine revelations at their basis in a faithful logical manner in relation to the one undefined God. The Bible, Tanakh, including the Torah, but distinguished from it in a clear and prominent objective manner, constituted a basis for the entirety of the monotheistic faiths, and at the same time a basis for the separation between the faith to the logical thought. The refutation of this basis of separation obligates a different requiring to the point of the conceptual separation, including a focusing on the basis of the divine revelation in the collective of the monotheistic faiths, including the basis of the monotheistic faith in general, and the Jewish one in particular meaning, the 5 books of the Torah. The importance of the book of the Torah from a faithful logical perspective is situated, therefore, in its being a phenomenal creation required to a divine revelation in relation to the undefined God, discussing the status of man facing the undefined God. From this perspective, there is no importance to the view whether the Torah is a human or a divine creation, whether it was written by Moses or by another or others, as Spinoza tried to claim. What is clear beyond any doubt is that the Torah is the creation in this world with a capital C, Behei Ha-Yadiah, possessing a beginning teaching on a divine existence beyond the Is, Yesh, and a human end, which is a beginning, calling to what is beyond itself. This is the supreme creation, discussing in an essential and basic manner the relation between man to God, who is undefined by definition. Therefore, the Torah, according to the essential Leibowitz, is without any doubt the basic, fundamental connection known to us between man to the undefined God, discussing in a fundamental and systematic manner the worship of the undefined God. For behold, this connection is made in the worship of the undefined God, whose supreme essence is the prophetic creation. Accordingly, also one should not wonder that, according to the formal Leibowitz, the existing, contemporary halakha, given to each and every time, regarding the essence and the manner of the fulfillment of the 613 commandments, is the true connection between man to God, even more than the basic Torah, since it develops the basic connection in a volitional constant manner that has no end but a middle only. At the same time as I showed, according to the essential Leibowitz, the existing halakha is it necessarily the true Torah, only and solely as far as it develops in a faithful logical manner, in a universal objective manner, and not in any other manner, with all its implications. The essential Leibowitz is therefore the successor of Maimonides, mainly in the central issue in his thought in the Guide for the Perplexed, constituting a starting point for his essential thought, and it is the worthy way for the status of man before God. From a faithful logical perspective, the worthy worship of God is done according to the conceptual practical aspiration for the faithful logical truth achieved solely by faithful logical study of refutation and counter-refutation, study of Torah and not rote study, Talmud Torah. This mode is most complicated from a human perspective, since it includes in practice the modes included in it, including the scientific thought and the philosophical moral thought. Therefore, the modes of the faithful logic are expressed in the supreme manner in the faithful logical thought, which is in other words, the new old prophecy, the divine revelation which is in the essence of its truth, the supreme appearance and the ultimate purpose of the thought of man. At the same time, it is accompanied by, and even brings it to new and unending peaks, the faithful logical interpretation of the divine revelation, given to discovery for each and every one of us by means of faithful logical thought. The integration between the faithful logical revelation to the faithful logical interpretation of the revelation, which are in practice together a faithful logical interpretation of the essence, havaya, including from the perspective of the thinking man the science, the morality, and the trail, shovalo, of the undefined God. Is it the divine religion upon earth, the worship of the undefined God, the ultimate purpose of man in this world? Behold, therefore, we have reached at the conclusion of this composition to general insights, important beyond measure, in relation to the legacy of Yeshayahu Leibowitz concerning his soul's desire, the continuation of the basic and universal in its essence Jewish faith, in the one and undefined God, in the aspect of the faith for its own sake, lishma, which is not dependent on anything but on the truth for its own sake. The essential Leibowitz heralds the necessary correction to the erroneous and temporary development of the disconnection of the faith from the theory of wisdom, philosophy, and from the science. A correction that has extensive implications for the development of man and for his reasoned return to God and to himself as one. The way of Yeshayahu Leibowitz constitutes an esoteric call in the desert of error, a courageous treading of a disciple of the wise, Talmid Hakam, facing the erroneous reality of his world, toward the returning of the way in the paths of the truth, toward the ultimate purpose of the existence of man in general and the believer in particular. Provocation for the sake of contradiction, reproof at the gate of awakening, overcoming and refutation in the infinite middle way of the status of man facing the undefined God. For the purposes of summarizing this composition regarding the riddle in the middle of the way, I shall now require to a story upon which Yeshayahu Leibowitz returned time after time in one version similar to its fellow, illustrating not only the difference between his formal and esoteric way, but also his legacy to us and to the generations following him and us. According to this story, Leibowitz once met the writer S.Y. Agnon, and the latter asked him, "Tell me please, Yeshayahu, what was the reason that the immense force, the force which is not at all understood and cannot be understood to a man from the outside, the force that the faith had in the historical world of Judaism, that it is apparently broken? and I will tell you what was the answer that I gave him. Rabbi Shmuel Yosef, you presented to me a question whose very understanding, the understanding of the question, obligates that the one asked be a man who is involved in 3,000 years of history of the Jewish people and of Judaism, so that he understands what you intended when you spoke about the force that this thing had, and about the breach that was broken. Well, similarly, I will give you also an answer that can be said on one foot, and what I say, which is but a hint, to you it will be understood. The force of the Torah was broken in the people of Israel from the time that the Torah became Talmud Torah, and I do not remember today if I said also professional Talmud Torah, because the word professionalism in faith, this term returned and repeated several times in the continuation of the conversation between us. And behold for us the hint in its full power. The meaning of Torah was the objectification of the faith in the people of Israel, and separately stands the institution of the Talmud Torah. And further, I can tell you that Agnon was very, very impressed, at least according to his words, from the answer I gave him, and said that in this I formulated a thing that he thought about very much, and did not know how to find this expression by himself, to find this correct expression, and he finds it in my words. Torah that became Talmud Torah, that is, a profession for professionals. And he himself afterwards, in the continuation of the conversation, used this thing, that the verse, Moses commanded us a Torah, an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob, Deuteronomy 33:4. It should be formulated today, Moses commanded us a Torah, an inheritance for the dealers, Askenim, in it. On the face of things, Leibowitz discourses to Agnon regarding the difference between a Torah interpretation that is in the aspect of a profession to a Torah interpretation that is lishma, for its own sake. But from the revealed answer of Agnon, it is not possible to understand at all what his intention is. For behold, in a rational manner, interpretation as a profession can be identical to interpretation that is not done as a profession, as long as they lean upon identical rules. How much more so universal ones? What difference does it make? Ma nafshach, that man researching in the natural sciences as a profession, can reach identical or similar conclusions like a man researching in the natural sciences for its own sake, and not for the receiving of a salary. So also, a man researching in the theory of wisdom can apparently reach identical or similar conclusions to those of a man researching in the theory of wisdom within the framework of his work in the university, etc., etc. But it is not so if a man acts for the understanding of the Torah according to tools that are not rational, versus a man acting for the understanding of the Torah according to rules that are rational, that are given to refutation, to the objectification of the Torah, which anyway cannot be only in the people of Israel, but is necessarily universal. It is not so when a man acts within an institutional framework, in the manner of patch upon patch, without a systematic rational action of refutation and exemplary proof, versus a man acting not from within a rigid, dogmatic, and not always rational institution, but from within a rational method, pure and complete, of a faithful logical interpretation in general, and of the book of the Torah in particular. Here these short reflections regarding the formal and esoteric, essential thought of Yeshayahu Leibowitz are summarized. Here we reach the closing of a circle that began in the world of science, passed through the world of wisdom and morality, and ended in the faithful, logical world. We have reached again a world that seems to have been forgotten, to the renewal of the new old and inseparable connection between the world of science to the world of thought and the world of faith, whose faithful logical conclusion, according to Leibowitz, is the transition from Talmud Torah as an institution to study of Torah as an essence. This is the reasoned, modern, and correcting return to the monumental project of Maimonides on the way to the faithful logic, on the way to the new old halakha, in the paths of the truth, to an exemplary interpretation of the book of the Torah, an interpretation suitable for every text wherever it is, whether divine or whether in the language of men, whether written by one of the people, or a single one, or unity and uniqueness. The faithful logical interpretation of the text as itself. This short composition was required, therefore, to the soul's desire of Leibowitz, as of his rabbi and teacher, Maimonides, meaning the continuation of the existence and the constant development of the true Jewish faith, straight of way, devoid of partiality, rational, exemplary, toward new peaks and against degeneration and decline characterizing the pull to the bottom of the ladder, and whose meaning, heaven forbid, strange worship, avodah zarah, corporeality, and idolatry. As I opened, so I conclude. Often and perhaps always, the most complicated things in the world, of the is, yesh, are in practice the simplest things. This matter is necessitated by the rational reality. We understand, according to an exemplary interpretation of the reality, that the most complicated things are necessarily composed of parts divided as themselves and acting according to fixed laws. It is not in heaven, lo bashamayim he, and a word fitly spoken, davar davur al ofnav, are the essence of this matter, and the exemplary rational proof is the tool for the renewed progress of man in the field of the theories of wisdom and faith which were neglected for such a long time, versus his progress in the field of science and technology, which is necessarily from the distinct theoretical field of the matter. According to one of the truths learned from the biblical text, it arises that what is given to the recognition of man is the world of the is alone, and there is nothing in the world of the is which occurs without a process. The first man, Adam, did not bring to the world the book of the Torah. Noah did not bring to the world the book of the Torah. Abraham did not bring to the world the book of the Torah. A process not simple in action was required, although simple in recognition treading in the paths of the truth, to reach this supreme creation, and so on and so forth in a constant manner. This matter is learned from within the Torah itself, as well as many other matters learned from within an exemplary proof, from within the text as itself without homilies, midrashim, without legends, agadot, and without subjective interpretation, but solely according to a pure, faithful logical interpretation. An interpretation of the biblical text according to the way of the interpretation of nature, but differently from Spinoza. An interpretation occupying itself with what is between the things, in the laws learned from the parables in an inclusive manner according to logical analysis alone. An interpretation in an exemplary manner of the things given by definition, also to refutation. A modern, faithful logical interpretation of the Bible, and according to the justified determination of Maimonides, of the book of the Torah as itself as a separate unit from the rest of the scriptures of the Tanakh, from a logical perspective. This is an interpretation against the revealed in the senses, and for the revealed afterthought, which does not contradict at all the theoretical and moral reason, but includes them as one, as a unity, as a faithful logical chariot, Merkava. This is an interpretation in which God does not descend upon the mountain, the plagues do not strike the Egyptians, the sea does not split into two, the manna does not fall from heaven, and the water does not come out of the rock. All these are parables, among others, to the fact that the Torah in its deep meaning is not acquired to man from the miracle, but solely from the rational thought and from the correct action accompanying the thought, which are many times done against the momentary, material tendency, thought and action toward, the faithful logic, toward the overcoming like a lion. The necessary meaning of that same faithful logical interpretation of the Bible is without doubt also a great and dramatic revolution in the world of halakha, supposed to constitute that same oral Torah, leaning upon the Bible as a constitution from which not a single jot, yud, is to be detracted, and translating it into the worship of God required from the believer for his time, according to his faithful logical decision. This is a correction of that same breach in the world of Judaism, characterizing the faiths in general and the theory of reason in particular, which rightly occupied Leibowitz just as it occupied Maimonides generations before him. Maimonides saw it worthy to correct the halakha of his time and to make in it a rational order according to the tools that were in his hands, from within it as itself, as the commandment of the Scripture for a graded process toward the truth, and against built-in opposition of his time. To be distinguished from his teacher, the essential Leibowitz continues in the middle of the way the outlining of the thought for the coming generations, for the sake of the correction of the institutional, and necessarily also the essential state of the theory of morality, and of the halakhic faith, from Talmud Torah, rote study, to study of Torah, rational research. And if I reached here and now, behold, it is worthy to conclude in a festive manner, for the honor and memory of Yeshayahu Leibowitz, and for all the possessors of the faithful logical thought who preceded him, and for those who will come after him. What is more wonderful, what is more supreme than the moment of rational enlightenment? And how much more so the faithful rational one, which necessarily breaks the boundaries of the individual for the sake of the collective, and the boundaries of the collective for the sake of the individual. What is happier than the moment of rational recognition in which the way is opened again for the climbing in the paths of the truth of the theories of wisdom, morality, and the faithful logic? Behold, the chains of the institutionalized and anachronistic religion are slowly clearing a rational place for the aspiration toward the supreme free will, in a constant and unceasing, by definition, discovery of the rational way for the worship of the undefined God. The way is open toward the horizon of the custom of truth, of man facing the undefined God, including by definition also the custom of man toward his fellow, a faithful logical interpretation of the faith in God in general and of the eternal and wonderful Torah in particular. Behold again, it is given to us to tread in a modern manner, in the conceptual practical paths of truth, in the faithful logical way against and above the material way alone. To tread again in the paths of the truth of the true promised land, the conceptual practical land. This is the land which was seen and is always seen from the heights of the mountain of the prophecy of truth, open and spread for the future generation, for constant and never-ending exemplary discovery of the worship of the undefined God. And if you ask Professor Yeshayahu Leibowitz, who will bring us to that same climbing in the paths of the way of the faithful logical truth, I am sure he will tell you, each and every one of us, with thought first and with action for their own sake, Lishma, an end that is entirely a beginning.